This content is not suitable for children and may contain depictions of violence.
Hi, I'm your host, Cambo. Grab a beer and pull up a deck chair. This is True Crime Island, another true crime podcast. Hi, Islanders. Well, sorry for the lateness of this episode, but a few things got in the way. Funny to be suffering from virtual jet lag the last couple of weeks. I was working, filling in for a colleague on a different account and had to start so early. And for me, being on afternoon shift for over a decade, it was quite difficult. See, my body clock's permanently shifted 4 hours behind normal people, which is great going to Thailand to see Kate, is there 3 or 4 hours behind, depending on summertime. But it really took the toll on me being here, I can tell you. Anyway, for tonight's case, I reference spiegel.de, stern.de, faz.net, build.de, dutchnews.nl, findmadeline.com, and meaw.com. That's meaww.com. Anyway, I started trying to research and write something on Madeleine McCann. The problem is with this case that to do it real justice and not just go over the basics, you end up down so many rabbit holes that it just seems to never end. And most people know the basics, so there's no point going over all that. Now, trying to verify witness statements on timelines, where they were and what they were doing at what time, to try and do something like that, something as simple as, say, trying to get to the bottom of the initial photos that were printed out on the night of the alleged disappearance. Now, that can take all day, reading statements of those involved, checking timelines, and then searching online for the specs of the printer and paper that was used, and also how they got access to the photo files to print them out. For instance, some statements say Russell O'Brien, one of Kate and Jerry's friends, spoke to Ann Tierney. Now, she was one of the nannies, she was working that night at the Ocean Club. Russell asked Tierney that he needed a card reader to print off photos. Now, she didn't have one, but had a Kodak G600 photo printer that you could plug a USB key into to print from. Now, Russell mentions a USB stick, or he needs a card reader. Which one, Russell? Now, unless you have a camera docked into the printer, you can't print from a USB stick. So, did he have a memory card or USB stick? Now, how did he get the photos onto that USB stick if he did have one? So this is where you start going down the first rabbit hole. But the thing is, Kate's camera is a Canon 620 PowerShot. Now, it is PIC bridge compatible via the camera's USB cable, but this is never mentioned in the printing. So just trying to find out if the photos were printed well before the announcement of the disappearance, as some suggest, because, say, Madeleine's disappearance was staged that night. It's so time-consuming. Also, there's just so much bullshit just on this one point, which is a very important point, because people say it would take so much time to print 20 or 30 photos that were printed off that night, and that it would run out of ink before it could. Well, the way this printer prints, you buy a photo pack. It comes with a paper stock and a cartridge matched to the exact number of prints available in the pack. You can get 50, 100 or 200 packs that can be purchased. Now, about the time it took to print them, well, there's a lot of misinformation that they couldn't have got the printer set up and got the printer, found the photo, and then printed 20 or 30 photos in the time frame they had to get those photos out. Well, you can grab the first few photos that come off, and that only takes a couple of minutes once they start printing. Then you can come back for the rest later. Now, that's what Russell said he did. So there's so much noise surrounds this case. Now, if the printer had a 50-pack installed, well, 20 or 30 photos can easily be printed off if that's as much stuff as you got left. Now, as you can see, just this one seemingly minor but quite important point, it does take all day to research because this equipment's nearly 20 years old. Then when you try to work out when the last time a reliable witness saw Madeleine alive, again, you go down so many rabbit holes. Mainly because all of the Tapper 7, Kate and Jerry's initial statements, plus their respective statements later, they contain so many inconsistencies that it's so confusing to work out what really happened on that night. Now, I've read extensively through the PJ files online. Now, these are the files the Portuguese authorities put online when they shelve a case. They're quite an interesting read. You should look them up. Now, not only are they interesting just in the fact that there's all these evidence files, when you start looking at the Tapper 7, Kate and Jerry's statements, you can see why people don't trust them, because either their stories change or they become really vague. So you may think I'm waffling on a bit here. What I'm trying to get to is that there is no way I can cover this case in an episode or 2 or even 3. What I do suggest is you have a listen, if you haven't already, at the podcast Maddie by Mark Sunokonoko. Also have a look at Richard D. Hall's videos about the case, which can be found at his website richplanet.net. Now, it's not the best organised website in the world, but you'll find many videos he's done on the case. The one you should look at first, this is Statement Analysis of Jerry and Kate McCann, in which he interviews Peter Hyatt, a respected statement analysis expert. Now, this is a must. Also, search for Peter Hyatt's YouTube channel for not only McCann's statement analysis, but he goes over quite a few well-known cases, just like Joe Benet. Now, he's really, really good at what he does. Okay, so last week there's another suspect in the Madeleine McCann case, Christian Bruckner. Now, that was splashed all over the UK and world news as this new suspect. Well, no, he has been suspected for a long time and was cleared by the Portuguese years ago. I suspect maybe it was planted in the news to distract for what's going on in the UK at the moment because of the virus and all these other things. Still, maybe new evidence or information has surfaced. Don't know. The Germans are keeping that information close to their chests. Now, one thing I must say, though, about the McCann case is that if you ever hear of anything in the news about a close family friend that said this or that, just don't believe it without checking, as that close family friend is likely to be Clarence Mitchell, the McCann's slimy, lying spin doctor. Now again, I won't go into this scumbag, but Richard D. Hall will tell you about him. He goes into quite a lot of detail about all the background to the Madeleine case. But just be aware that this Clarence Mitchell is usually the one that gets the pro-McCann stories planted in the news. Okay, so that's why I'm not covering the Madeleine McCann case tonight. There's just too much bullshit surrounding it at the moment, and there has been for years. Now, I will tell you, though, what I think that happened at this point. Either Maddie died earlier than the night she allegedly went missing, and the McCanns and their mates, the Tapper 7, are covering up. Now, I reckon they can all keep their mouths shut. It's not impossible. But that is just my opinion on the research I've done. So, Jerry and Kate, that is my opinion, but I'm happy to be proven otherwise. Anyway, let's get back to tonight's case. Now, the dude they're talking about in the German prison, well, he wasn't the only one suspected of being involved in Maddie's disappearance. There was also this character, Martin Ney. Now, he was born on the 12th of December 1970 in Bremen, Germany. Now, I really haven't got too much info on his childhood years, but by 17, he blackmailed his family doctor and the parents of a classmate. Now, he writes a note to the parents that says, "You give us 150,000 marks and we don't kidnap your children. If you reject the proposal or alert the police, one of your children will die." Now, that's Deutschmarks. They didn't have euros back then, and it was in West Germany, not East Germany. They were different places in that year. Now, he's caught, and in early 1989 at the Blumenthal District Court, he's convicted and sentenced to 8 weekends of community service for attempted extortion. Now, the conviction is entered to what they call an education register. Now, when he turned 24, his record was deleted from this education register, and he decided he wanted to foster a child. Fuck's sake. He wanted to foster a child. Now, this isn't a normal type of thing for a single 24-year-old student living alone in a one-bedroom apartment would do. It wasn't one bedroom, it was a studio. But as there was a shortage of foster parents, the youth welfare officer accepted him as a foster father. Now, the judge that presided over his blackmail case was also the one who dealt with the formalities of fostering the child. You'd think he'd know better, but he granted custody of a 12-year-old boy to Ney in 1996. Now, this child lived with Ney until he was of legal age, and he reckons he was never sexually abused by it. Now, while studying, Ney worked alongside youth workers, and he familiarised himself with the clients and the locations they frequented, like youth hostels and camps. Ney completed a teaching degree, but he didn't go through with the second state examination. In 2000, he applied for fake university certificates in social work to get a childcare position at a Hamburg foundation, which he worked until 2008. My God, don't they check any of this stuff? You put anything on your CV, I reckon, and you'll never get caught. I just think HR departments are hopeless. They never want to check anything. So he moved to Hamburg in 2001 and again lived alone. He was described by those that knew him as unobtrusive, friendly, and a nice guy. In 2005, he was accused of sexual abuse by a 25-year-old that said Ney abused him as a teenager in 1996. Now, at the time, he had also been reported by a mother for touching her 2 sons. Now, he got out of the 2 cases by paying a fine of 1,800 euros. Now, the first case was actually outside the statute of limitations, so he just had to pay a fine for touching this woman's 2 sons. In 2006, Ney blackmailed a social worker from Berlin by threatening to report him for possessing child porn. Now, Ney demanded 20,000 euro for his silence. Now, he was reported to police, and when they went to his flat to interview him, get this, he opens the door in his undies, and there's a 15-year-old boy lying on a mattress in the living room. Now, this boy was in the care of Ney at the time, as he was a social worker and in charge of him. Police didn't ask any questions. They really just didn't investigate that at all, for fuck's sake. Now, he would get busted for the blackmail and got a 10-month suspended sentence for attempted extortion. Now, as part of this investigation, investigators did a search of Ney's computer. Now, on it, they found, amongst other things, 30,000 child porn images. Now, charges for the possession of the images just didn't arise because the investigators couldn't determine when the images were saved on the computer. They also had been last accessed so long beforehand that they were out of the statute of limitations. So they just closed the case. Now, they took all the images on a CD. Now, little did they know who was on these photos at the time. They didn't check the CD of photos at all. It was just put in storage. Now, as you can probably see, Ney is quite a dangerous person, but he seems to be getting slaps on the wrists for his crimes. Now, this will come back to haunt authorities who maybe should have looked into him a little bit further, a little bit earlier. You see, there had been at the time a serial abuser of young boys in the area and 3 unsolved murders of young boys, and this had been going on for ages. Now, witnesses described this person as strikingly tall, a stocky man with a deep voice speaking German, who wore dark clothes, a mask and gloves. Now, he became known as the Masked Man and the Black Man, or Masken Man. The first murder was of 13-year-old Stefan Jahr, who disappeared from a boarding school in Schiesel on the 31st of March 1992. His body would be found 5 weeks later, buried in the Verdun Dunes, approximately 35 minutes drive southwest of Schiesel. He was buried with his hands tied behind his back. Now, then just over 3 years later, on the night of July 24th, 1995, 8-year-old Dennis Rostel disappeared from a camp near Selke-Nord. Now, that's near Schleswig, north of Hamburg and close to the Danish border. His body was discovered on the 8th of August 95 after being found by German tourists buried in a sand dune near Vinderup in Denmark. Now, this wasn't the first attack in the Selke-Nord tent camp. The Selke-Nord tent camp, I'll get it right. In August of 1992, a 9-year-old child was sexually abused by a masked man at the camp. At the end of August 1994, a 13-year-old boy woke up in the Selke-Nord camp when the masked man began touching him. Now, that was for about 10 minutes, and then he disappeared. Now, 2 days later, the masked man again touched another 13-year-old at the camp. On the 5th of September 2001, 9-year-old Dennis Klein disappeared from his room at Schulenhain, Wolfsbüttel. Now, 2 weeks later, he was found murdered by a mushroom picker in a bush on a forest road between Kirchtimke and Hepstead. The Special Task Force, known as, and they call them SOCOs, or Special Task Force, this Special Task Force Dennis was set up to solve Dennis Rostel's murder in 1995. This would come to include the similar murders of Stefan Jahr in 92 and Dennis Klein in 2001. They would also link the masked man to 40 other abuse cases. Now, when they profiled the masked man, they found he was athletic at first, but seemed to have put on weight over the years. He wore dark clothes, gloves and a mask. He would enter tent camps, youth hostels and single-family houses to abuse children. Now, these were usually lower-income family houses. He was not scared of what he was doing. He not only entered these places at night, but he did so with a high chance of being discovered, as there would be many other boys or even the guardians that could have caught him in the act. Now, in fact, several times he did have to do a runner after the boys resisted or he was seen by other boys. The 3 murder victims were transported vast distances in Masked Man's car. One was even taken over a guarded border into Denmark. So he has these kids in the car driving long distance. He doesn't mind getting caught going into places, although it is at night, but he seems to know what he's doing. Now, the task force realised that the masked man seemed to know a lot about the locations that most of the children were attacked at, and that he planned these attacks quite well. Soko Dennis would release to the public what they knew in the hope that somebody would come forward as they continued to investigate the murders. Now, they had about 7,800 reports come into him without a breakthrough in the case. So in August 2010, what happened was a witness came forward after he saw an old documentary on the murders. Now, he'd been jogging near where Dennis Klein had been kidnapped and remember seeing the perpetrator and Dennis in a car on the forest road. So this led to a sketch being made of this described scene, which included that type of car thought to be used. Now, this was released in February 2011, and then further good leads came in. On April the 15th, 2011, the police arrested a prime suspect. Now, just before in February 2011, the police searched for a car that could possibly belong to the serial offender. Now, this search yielded no results, but a 1995 abuse victim of the masked man, he sees this search and suddenly remembers that years ago, a social worker asked him about his home on a holiday vacation. And he even knows this guy's name, Martin. And it doesn't take investigators long to identify Martin as Martin Ney, and that's the guy that they just arrested. Martin Ney, who at the time was 40 years old, quickly confessed after the first interrogation by investigators. Now, Ney admitted to murdering Stefan Jahr, Dennis Rostel and Dennis Klein, and also to abusing about 40 other children. Ney told investigators that he killed to cover up the rapes and to not be identified. He said he strangled Stefan Jahr on the night of his disappearance because he thought he'd seen his number plate on the car and he would get caught. In Dennis Roster's case, he said he drove with him in his car and they spent a few days holidaying near Hostelbro in Denmark before he strangled him. Then Ney suffocated Dennis Klein because Dennis fought back too hard at the time. On February 27, 2012, the judges sentenced Martin Ney to life in prison for triple murder and 20 sexual abuse charges. He must also remain in preventative detention if he's released, as a psychiatric assessor classified Ney as relapse prone. So, Honours, that's Martin Ney, who was able to prey on his victims with ease as the local police just didn't investigate him thoroughly when they had the chance. It took them 20 years to lock him away and 20 years of all that damage he caused. He's also suspected of at least 2 other murders, including the 7th of April 2004 abduction of 10-year-old Jonathan Coulomb from France, whose body was found nearly 2 weeks later on the 19th. Now, there is another murder he was sort of linked to but ended up not being, and that was of Nicky Verstappen, an 11-year-old Dutch boy who disappeared on the 10th of August 1998 from a summer camp he was attending in Bronsum, Limburg. His body was found on the 11th of August in nearby Landgraaf. He was cleared of the murder of Nicky Verstappen, and a Dutchman, Joseph Breck, has been arrested, and as far as I can see, he's been charged with murder and the trial started, but I can't find whether the trial has concluded yet. So that's one of the other scumbags, this Martin Ney, that at one time along with Christian Bruckner was suspected of being involved in the McCann case. Now, I suppose before we go, I should mention the latest in the McCann case. Now, as I write this, Christian Bruckner denies anything to do with the abduction of Madeleine McCann. German police have announced that Madeleine is dead and are appealing to witnesses who may have seen Bruckner's cars. One of them's an old white van with the bottom section painted in yellow and an older model Jaguar in the Pré de Luz area at the time of Madeleine's abduction in April of 2007. Now, they say they're confident Bruckner is the perpetrator, but they don't have enough evidence to convict him and won't release what evidence they do have to say that he did it. Now, it's crazy times. It always is around this case. We even have people coming out saying they can see his van in satellite photos taken at the time. Now, I saw these, and all they show is this little tiny white rectangle near where Bruckner was allegedly staying at the time. Now, that's just noise, not evidence. The German police say they've sent 2 letters to the McCanns, and they say they haven't got any. Now, it looks like the UK cops may not have passed them on. For real, this is the weirdest case of a missing kid I've ever come across. Now, are the Germans trying to stitch up Bruckner? I mean, who knows? Now, I think half the reason so many people think the McCanns had something to do with the disappearance of Madeleine is in what they've said and how they've acted. For instance, some of the quotes Kate Healy, or McCann as she goes by when it suits her, some of these quotes she said are really strange. Look, I'm not going to say strange. They're fucking disturbing. The first one, you may have to put your tinfoil hat on, where she says, whoever she is with, she will be giving them her tuppence worth. Now, tuppence is slang for a young girl's vagina, so make of that what you think, if it's Freudian slip or not. Now, this other one is really disturbing, where in her book she wrote, I asked Jerry apprehensively if he had any real horrible thoughts or visions of Madeleine. He nodded. Haltingly, I told him about the awful pictures that scrolled through my head of her body, her perfect little genitals torn apart. Now what the fuck? What mother would say that, let alone publish it in a book? I mean, if you did say it, you've got so much time not to put it in a book. This is just absolutely crazy. That just takes the cake. Anyway, the latest statement from this Operation Grange, that's the task force set up to review and investigate the case, is June 19, 2020. The Met received one letter from the BKA on 12th of June, which was passed to the family. The letter did not state that there was evidence or proof that Madeleine is dead. The MPS continues to investigate Madeleine's disappearance as a missing person investigation. No letter has been received by the Met from the German prosecutor. Now, the little bit where they state the letter did not state that there was evidence or proof that Madeleine is dead, well, yeah, that's probably true. But the letter may have said they strongly believe she's dead, they think she's dead, but they just need more evidence to prove it. This is how these things are getting spun around. Now, this Operation Grange was set up to review the case years ago, but in doing so, they started with the assumption that Madeleine was abducted and didn't start with a clean slate. Now, how you can review a case when you already are seeing it as an abduction case, and that means you're not going to investigate Kate, Jerry and the Tapper 7 as potential suspects in her disappearance. Now, this has been widely criticised by many, including law enforcement officials. Now, I could go on and on and on about this case, but like I said at the start, maybe you just have to look at some of Richard D. Hall's research, Peter Hyatt's statement analysis, and the Maddie podcast. Now, maybe if this case ever comes to a conclusion and Maddie is found or her remains are found and we have a conviction, I might do an episode about it. Now, I did try to reach out to Richard D. Hall a while back, but he hasn't got back to me. I don't know if I'm in the spam folder being ignored or what. Now, what I wanted to do was interview him and discuss his vast research. Now, anyone who does know him, please let him know. I'd love to interview him. I would be very happy to supply the questions beforehand. So, Islanders, let's see what happens in the next few weeks. And that's the end of this episode. If you want to support the island, there are links in the description for Patreon, PayPal and merch. Please feel free to comment, like and subscribe, and I would truly appreciate if you share the channel. Hit the bell to be notified, and because I don't bleep out the swearing and I use words like murder and fuck, the YouTube gods won't promote the channel. So your subscription and sharing are really, really appreciated in getting more people on the island. Also, if you watch it to the end, makes a lot of difference. Maybe you can't stand it. Now I am going to be running this 1,000 subscriber giveaway. I think at this point of time, we're over 800. It'll probably be a t-shirt. It will be open to all subscribers. So please get the subscriber count up. Help us all out at the island. Be part of the island. And we'll get one of these t-shirts off to one of you. So that's about it. I've been your host, Cambo. You've been watching True Crime Island. And as I always say, don't forget to delete your browser history. Good night. Boom fuckalunga.